I got into my husband's car and found a tube of personal lubricant in the glove compartment. I didn't say a word. I just quietly replaced it with industrial-strength superglue. Hours later, a horrific scream pierced the night, and the entire neighborhood was in chaos as firefighters rushed in. I'm really glad you're here. If you're watching this video, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel, and let me know in the comments where you're listening to this revenge story from. I sat at the kitchen table. The silence in the house was thick, like morning fog, a silence that had become an uninvited guest, always present. The old clock on the wall, a wedding gift from my late mother, ticked with an accusing rhythm. Each tick was a painful reminder of a life I was beginning to suspect had been nothing but a carefully constructed lie. My husband Richard had just come home from yet another so-called business dinner. He didn't just look tired. He looked haunted, like a man carrying a secret far too heavy to bear. His face was a map of fatigue and guilt, new lines around his eyes and mouth I hadn't seen before. He tossed his coat onto the sofa with a weariness that felt staged, loosened his tie as if it were a noose. He had to escape, then collapsed onto the bed, the springs groaning under his weight. He didn't even bother to shower. The scent of expensive cologne still lingered in the air, but it was tainted with something foreign, sweet, bold, undeniably feminine. A perfume I'd never worn, a shameless confession from a life I hadn't known he was living. Minutes later, his gentle snoring filled the house, once a sound that comforted me, now a mocking lullaby. A lullaby for a fool. I stood moving with the familiar quiet of a wife of 40 years and began tidying the mess he'd left in the living room. Coat, wallet, phone, his old laptop. His phone screen lit up. A new email notification glowed like an omen. My brow furrowed. Richard never used email. He always told me, "Margaret, that tech stuff's too complicated. I just like to make phone calls." And yet here it was, an email right before my eyes. Both curious and terrified, I opened it. The message was short. Just a few words that shattered my world. "You were amazing tonight, Dad," followed by a red heart emoji as sharp as a dagger in my chest. I froze as if I'd been slapped. The digital world had become a cruel mirror reflecting a truth I didn't want to face. Dad. The word echoed in my mind. Who called him that? And with such intimacy, my fingers shook as I scrolled for clues, but there was nothing. Just a strange address, random characters offering no answers, only more questions. A shiver ran down my spine, not from cold, but from bone-deep dread. It was like a draft sneaking through a crack, exposing a hidden room in my life I'd never known existed. I glanced toward the bedroom and saw Richard shift, snoring softly, his face infuriatingly peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. My heart pounded like the footsteps of a thief. Quickly, I placed his phone back, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. I went back to cleaning now, on autopilot. I gathered his dirty clothes to take to the laundry. In his pants pocket, I found a neatly folded slip of paper, fresh and crisp. It was a receipt from a luxury steakhouse in San Antonio, dated tonight. My eyes narrowed. San Antonio. He had told me he was meeting partners in Dallas. A bitter laugh escaped me. Richard always hated driving to Dallas. San Antonio, though, held fond memories for him. His late mother once lived there. But who had he dined with in San Antonio while lying to me about Dallas? The bill showed dinner for two. A pricey bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, the very wine he'd once given me on our 10th anniversary, a bottle I'd never forgotten, along with steak and pasta. I tried to remember the last time Richard had taken me somewhere like that. Maybe 10 years ago, when I opened my first bakery. That night still burned in my memory, candlelight, his proud smile, the toast to my success. Now that memory was nothing but a faded photograph in an album of lies. I pulled out my phone and quietly snapped photos of the receipt and the email. I didn't want to believe it, but 40 years of being a wife, an instinct as old as time, told me something was happening, and I had to uncover it. My hands shook not only from anger, but from fear. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, watching the life I'd built crumble before me. I went into the garage. Richard's old SUV was still warm, thick with the smell of gasoline and faint traces of that unfamiliar perfume clinging to his clothes. I opened the door, dread knotting in my stomach. Flashlight in hand, I searched every corner of the driver's seat. Nothing, just loose change and an empty water bottle. But when I reached into the glove compartment, my fingers brushed something slick. I pulled it out, and my heart stopped. A used tube of personal lubricant, the cap crusted with dried residue. A filthy, undeniable piece of evidence. I froze in the dim garage, staring at it as if it were a physical embodiment of my worst fears. Richard and I hadn't been intimate in years. He always claimed he was too tired, that age had stolen his desire. So who was this for? The question echoed in my skull, each word a hammer blow against an already fragile reality. I felt paralyzed, but survival instincts kept me steady. I placed it back exactly where I found it, scrubbed my hands raw with tissues, as though afraid the betrayal might leave a permanent stain. I searched further this time, more thoroughly. Under the back seat, I found crumpled tissues soaked in that sweet, heavy perfume, bold, arrogant, brazen. Not a man's scent, not mine. It was a shameless scream of betrayal reverberating through the very place that had once been my sanctuary. I photographed everything, the tube of lubricant, the crumpled tissues, as if I could somehow capture the scent in a picture. I shut the car door and walked back inside, the weight of the evidence pressing down on my shoulders, heavier than any bag of flour I had ever carried. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands trembling uncontrollably as I picked up Richard's phone again. By then I was almost certain he had betrayed me. I checked his messages, but they were all business conversations, cold and dry as a desert. His inbox was empty, except for that strange email. I searched his drafts, his sent folder. Nothing. Everything was spotless, too spotless. Perfect, in a way that reeked of suspicion, as if he had erased every trace of betrayal. A master liar, I thought bitterly. The fury inside me had hardened into a cold, heavy stone lodged in my chest. And now something more dangerous began to rise, the hunger for truth, the need to expose the lie, no matter the cost. The next morning, as the first sunlight filtered through the curtains, I was already awake, silent as a ghost in my own home. The images of the tube of gel, the restaurant receipt, and the email circled endlessly in my mind, a toxic carousel of suspicion. I stood in the kitchen, hands busy, but my mind a storm. I made a simple breakfast, 2 fried eggs, a few slices of toast, and a strong black coffee, just the way Richard liked it. I had barely slept all night. Richard came downstairs looking tired, his hair messy, his eyes half shut. He sat at the table, lifted the coffee cup, took a sip, then set it down half full. "I've got an important meeting today," he said hoarsely. A rehearsed line I'd heard countless times without even glancing at me. "I'll probably be home late." He was good, too good. The lies came so easily, his tone so natural it made my blood run cold. I forced a crooked smile, nodded stiffly, though what I really wanted to scream was, "Where's the meeting with who?" "In San Antonio again." But I swallowed it, letting my anger smolder like a silent flame. All I whispered was, "All right, be careful." He stood, patted my shoulder, a gesture of habit more than affection, and left. The door clicked shut, leaving the kitchen steeped in silence, and me alone with suspicions growing into a nightmare I could no longer ignore. I cleared the table, washed each dish, clung to the rhythm of chores like a fragile anchor in the storm. But I couldn't just sit there imagining. I needed truth, solid proof. I picked up my phone and scrolled for Mrs. Miller's number, an old friend who had once helped me when I opened the bakery. She had told me about a private investigator she knew, someone discreet, someone who specialized in infidelity cases. "Margaret, if you ever need it, I can give you Thomas's number. He's trustworthy." At the time, I never thought I would. Now I had no choice. I called her, my voice shaking each ring like a drumbeat of dread. "Hello, Mrs. Miller. Could you help me get in touch with Thomas? I need him." She was silent for a few seconds, the weight of it pressing through the line, before she asked Margaret what happened. "Did Richard do something?" I exhaled, unwilling to spill details over the phone. My pride ripped raw. "I just need to know the truth. Can you help me?" Mrs. Miller, a woman of few words, but sharp intuition, agreed without hesitation. An hour later, I received a text from Thomas arranging to meet at noon in a small cafe downtown. "Mrs. Hayes, don't worry, I'll help you," he wrote. Brief but enough to give me a sliver of comfort. a life raft in a sea of lies. At noon, I arrived at the cafe, a modest place with worn wooden tables, the smell of roasted beans filling the air, a scent that usually warmed me, but now felt foreign. I chose a quiet corner, sitting like a shadow in the well-lit room. Thomas walked in a stocky, middle-aged man in a light blue shirt, steady eyes that seemed to cut through surfaces straight to the truth. I handed him a USB drive with the photos I'd taken the night before, the strange email, the restaurant receipt, the tube of gel, the tissues. "This is all I have," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm not certain, but I think my husband is cheating." The words tasted bitter as ash. Thomas nodded, examined each photo carefully, his expression unreadable. He jotted notes into a small notebook. "Mrs. Hayes, I understand. I'll start surveillance on Mr. Hayes this afternoon. Don't worry, I'll report back soon." I looked at him, blinking back hot tears. "Thank you. I just want the truth, whatever it is." Thomas gave a slight nod, a flicker of empathy in his eyes. "I'll do my best. Go home now. Don't do anything that might raise his suspicion." I left the cafe, weaving through the crowd, with a hollow feeling inside. 40 years of marriage, a lifetime built on trust, now collapsing beneath my feet. I had once believed Richard was a family man, my steady anchor. And here I was, hiring a stranger to follow my husband. The irony was bitter. I felt like a character in a bad film, a role I had never auditioned for. That evening, I sat in my bakery surrounded by the familiar scent of yeast and flour, sorting through orders when my phone buzzed. A message from Thomas. My heart pounded like a drum, blood rushing in my ears as I opened it. It was a photo of Richard in his favorite light blue shirt, walking into a fancy restaurant, his hand clasped tightly with a woman's. I zoomed in, and my heart stopped. It was Allison, my daughter-in-law. She wore a tight black dress, bold makeup, bright red lipstick, her hair loose around her shoulders. They didn't look like father-in-law and daughter-in-law. They looked like lovers. Their bodies leaned toward each other, sharing a secret. I collapsed into the chair, my hands shaking violently as I clutched the phone. Allison. How could this be? At family gatherings, she and Richard had always acted distant, barely speaking. Now I realized it was all a carefully staged performance for me. Thomas sent more photos. In one, they sat tucked into a corner, the table adorned with candles and flowers. Allison leaned toward him smiling, while Richard raised his glass, his gaze filled with a tenderness I had never seen, not once in 40 years. Even when I was young back in San Diego, with long hair and a radiant smile, he had never looked at me like that. That gaze of admiration, of love, I thought was mine, now belonged to her. Near midnight, Thomas sent a video. The clock read 2 a.m. I plugged in my headphones, guarding the secret like contraband, and pressed play, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. In the video, Allison leaned in, whispering something in Richard's ear that made him burst out laughing, a sound I no longer recognized. Her voice was sweet, her eyes glittering in the candlelight. Then they stood, and Richard held the door for her, every gesture that of a man with his lover. I replayed the video again and again, my own chosen torture. Each time I replayed it, it felt like another knife driving into my heart. Allison, my daughter-in-law, the one I had treated like my own daughter, the one I had taught to make our family's traditional flan. And Richard, the man I had given my whole life to, the man I had built a family with. What were they doing behind my back, behind Michael's back? The questions crashed over me like waves threatening to drown me. I saved every photo and video onto a USB drive, carefully noting each detail, the date, the time, the place, even the restaurant's name. My hands worked like a machine, but my mind was chaos. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe Richard and Allison were capable of something so vile, so cruel. But the proof stood before me, undeniable, immovable, a mountain of truth crushing me. I sat in my bakery surrounded by trays of sweet pastries, feeling my whole world crumble. I remembered those early days when we first opened the shop, when Richard helped me carry heavy sacks of flour. We used to laugh in that tiny kitchen, dreaming bigger than the sky. Now it all felt like a distant memory, a beautiful lie I had lived in for too long. The next morning, I stood in the bakery's small kitchen, holding the order list for a major downtown hotel. The scent of flour and vanilla, once my comfort, now seemed hollow and meaningless. As I signed the delivery slip, my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. My heart sank when I saw the detective's name. Just one short message, Mrs. Hayes, I've sent more evidence. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but my hands trembled as I opened it. A string of new photos appeared. The first showed Richard in his familiar gray shirt walking out of a law office near the town square. Beside him was Allison, dressed in a beige business dress, her hair tied high, dark sunglasses covering half her face, a pitiful attempt at disguise. They walked too close, not like father-in-law and daughter-in-law, but like lovers. The next photo showed them standing in front of a 4-star hotel, glass doors gleaming, the gold sign shining bright. I zoomed in, desperate for some detail that could disprove what I was seeing, but there was none. They looked too natural, too comfortable together, a part of a world I clearly did not belong to. Then a short video came through. I pressed play, my heart hammering so violently it felt like it might burst. The footage was distant but clear enough. Richard and Allison stood on the 3rd-floor balcony of the hotel. His arm was wrapped around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder, her hair swaying in the breeze. Then, like a blade slicing through me, I saw them share a quick kiss. They didn't even bother to hide it. Brief, but enough to burn away the last ember of hope inside me. I replayed the video frame by frame, each time cutting deeper into my soul, like a slow descent into hell. The curtain shifted and Allison ran out to wrap her arms around Richard, her face glowing like a young girl in love. I collapsed into a chair, gripping the edge of the table just to keep myself from falling apart. Thomas texted again. They booked a room for the afternoon. Looks like they'll be staying overnight. I'll keep watching. I read it over and over, my throat tightening as if strangled. Just hours earlier, Richard had texted me, Margaret, I won't be home tonight. I have to meet a potential partner from out of town. Get some rest, sweetheart. His words sweet, gentle, the same as always. But now I knew they were lies. Lies rehearsed to perfection. A partner from out of town. He hadn't gone anywhere. He was right here in a 4-star hotel with our own daughter-in-law. I opened my external hard drive, carefully saving each photo, each video. Each time I hit save, I stared at the images as if to make sure I wasn't dreaming. In the video, the way Richard looked at Allison, so tender, the way he brushed her hair back, reminded me of what he used to do to me more than 30 years ago. Back then, we were young, and I believed love was forever. We made promises under the starry sky in San Diego. And now, watching this, it was nothing but lies and brazen betrayal. I thought back to all those family gatherings, everyone laughing around the table, the perfect family portrait. Allison always kept her distance from Richard. Sometimes she even looked irritated by him. Michael once joked, Mom, I don't think Allison can stand Dad. She dodges him like the plague, and I believed it. I thought they just didn't get along, that Allison was trying her best to fit into the family. Now I saw it clearly. It had all been an act, a carefully staged performance. They had played their roles too well in front of me, in front of Michael, in front of our neighbors. And I had been the fool, the blind wife betrayed by the two people right before my eyes. The world went on as usual, everyone living their lives, never knowing what was unfolding on that hotel balcony. But Thomas had caught it perfectly framed, like a hunter capturing prey, my reality exposed. I texted him back, Thank you. Please keep following them. I need to know everything. His reply was short, I will. Stay calm. That night I returned to the house that had once been my home with Richard. Now it felt foreign, haunted by ghosts and lies. I opened a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope, working with a cold determination. I printed every piece of evidence, photos of Richard and Allison leaving the law office, entering the hotel, standing on the balcony, every frame of the video. I arranged them neatly, sealed them in the envelope, and hid it at the bottom of the drawer beneath old family photos. I looked at one picture, Richard, Allison. Michael and me smiling at Michael's birthday years ago. Allison was hugging Michael tight. Richard's hand rested proudly on my shoulder. Now all I wanted was to tear it to shreds, erase those smiling faces from my life. The next morning before dawn, I heard the front door creak open. Richard stumbled in, reeking of alcohol. The partner was tough, Margaret. He rasped, his eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept a wink. I had to drink a lot. I'm exhausted. I stood in the kitchen, glass of water in hand, watching him perform each word salt in my wounds. "Go rest," I said calmly, my voice steady, the familiar tone of a wife. "You have work tomorrow." He nodded, patted my shoulder as if nothing had happened, then shuffled into the bedroom. Minutes later, his snores filled the house, as if he hadn't betrayed me, as if he hadn't spent the night with our daughter-in-law. Once I was sure Richard was asleep, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Thomas. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as though someone might overhear. "Mrs. Hayes." I recorded their conversation in the hotel parking lot. I used special equipment. They never noticed. "I'll send it to you right away." My heart pounded, but I answered simply, "Thank you, Thomas. Send me the file." A few minutes later, an audio file appeared in my messages. I put on my headphones, sat at the table, and pressed play. The first voice I heard was Allison's, cold, ambitious, and unfamiliar. "Dad, hurry up with that fake contract. I want the whole chain of bakeries right away. I want that old hag thrown out of the house." I felt a punch to the chest, gripping the phone tight in my hand. Then Richard's voice followed, deep and confident. "Don't worry about the paperwork. Margaret doesn't know a thing. Leave it to me. She trusts me too much." His words cut deeper than any knife. They weren't just betraying me, they were plotting to take everything I had built, my bakery chain, all the sweat, the tears, the sleepless nights, every batch of bread, every delivery I rushed across town to keep the bakery's reputation alive. It was mine. Richard had never lifted a hand in the kitchen. He had never stood behind the counter or signed a hotel contract. And now he and Allison wanted to steal it all, to push me out of the very home I had turned into a sanctuary. I nearly collapsed, but I stayed steady enough to copy the recording onto the USB drive where I kept the other evidence. I carefully logged the time and place, clinging to every detail as though they were my lifeline in this storm. The next morning, as I brewed coffee in the bakery, my phone buzzed again. Thomas had sent more photos shot with a telephoto lens. In them, Richard and Allison sat in the car, a thick stack of papers between them. Allison held a red pen marking the documents intently. Richard sat beside her, nodding and smiling, as if in full agreement. Thomas wrote, "I overheard something. Looks like they're planning to use a contact at the notary office to push through the transfer. I'll dig deeper." I zoomed in on the photo. The writing wasn't clear, but I knew these weren't ordinary papers. They were scheming to strip me of everything I had built, one step at a time. I sat among trays of sweet pastries, feeling my entire world collapse. I replayed the audio file, listening word by word. That hateful old hag. That's how Allison referred to me. I remembered the early days when she joined the family, when I taught her to cook, when I hugged her like a daughter. I thought she would be the woman Michael would build a future with. And Richard, the man I had loved since I was a young girl in San Diego, the man who once swore he would stand by me for life. Now they had turned me into a joke, a fool still clinging to love and family. A regular customer walked in, Mrs. Peterson, who always bought pastries for her grandchildren. "Margaret, your bakery is so busy these days. Your chain is really growing." "I'm proud of you," she said warmly. I forced a smile and replied, "Thank you. I'm doing my best." But inside I was nothing but pieces. I wondered if she knew the truth. What would she think of me? Would she see a strong woman or just a fool betrayed by her husband and daughter-in-law? I packed her pastries, watched her leave, then collapsed into a chair, clutching my head. I wanted to cry, but not a single tear came. Instead, a slow fire of rage burned inside me, like the fire in the oven ready to erupt at any moment. That night, I sat across from Richard in our small kitchen, the yellow light twisting his face into something unfamiliar. He ate steadily, speaking in that flat voice, as if nothing had happened. "Margaret, I have some important business papers to sign this week. You might want to look them over. They're pretty complicated." I lifted a piece of bread, pretended to bite, but in my head I only heard Allison's voice from the recording. "Dad, hurry up and sign the fake contract." I knew he was testing me, trying to pull me into his dirty plan. I forced a thin smile, masking myself, as the tired wife, too weary to argue. "Sure, I'll take a look later. I'm just tired right now." He nodded, sipping his wine, gazing at me as though nothing were wrong. But I knew behind that smile was a predator waiting for his moment to take it all. Richard poured himself more wine, his face flushed, rambling about a difficult client. I nodded absently, all the while wanting to scream, "Do you really think I'm that stupid?" When he finally stumbled into the bedroom, collapsing onto the bed, he dropped his car keys on the nightstand. They glinted under the dim light like a siren call to my vengeance. I stared at them, my heart pounding. This was my chance, my moment. I stepped into the bedroom, slowly, careful not to make a sound. Each footstep felt caught between pain and resolve, between the past and an uncertain future. I gripped the keys tight and went straight to the garage. The night was still silent, as though the whole world was holding its breath. Only the chirping of crickets outside the soundtrack to my quiet fury. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The weak beam lit up Richard's old SUV, the silent accomplice to his betrayal. I opened the door. The smell of gasoline lingered mixed with that sweet foreign perfume. I opened the glove compartment, and there it was, the tube of lubricant, the cap loose, dried residue clinging to the rim like a monument to betrayal. I picked it up, the weight of it disgusting in my hand, as though I was holding their filthy secret. Clearly they had used it again, a confirmation that Richard and Allison's twisted game was still alive. I carried the tube into the kitchen, set it on the counter, and scrubbed my hands with lemon soap. I washed furiously, as if I could erase the stain of betrayal from my skin. The fresh citrus scent didn't calm me, it only sharpened my focus. I opened the tool drawer and pulled out a tube of industrial-strength clear superglue, the same kind I once used to fix chairs at the bakery. A tool for my work now transformed into a weapon of revenge. Carefully, I twisted open the cap of the lubricant and squeezed drop after drop of glue inside, filling it to the brim. I wiped the nozzle, gave the tube a gentle shake to mix it, then tested a tiny bit. The stuff flowed out as smoothly as the original lubricant. To the naked eye, no one would notice a difference. I gave a thin smile, though a storm raged inside me. This wasn't a game. This was the first step toward justice. I put the tube back in the glove compartment, straightened the floor mat and seat exactly as they were, as if no one had touched a thing, then closed the car door. I popped the trunk to check. Just a few crumpled plastic bags, an empty water bottle, and an unused condom tucked in the corner. My heart skipped, but I wasn't surprised anymore. I snapped a photo with my phone, adding it to the growing archive of evidence. Each picture was another puzzle piece reminding me I couldn't let Richard and Allison stroll away with their lies. Back inside, I set the keys in their usual spot beside Richard's alarm clock. I grabbed an old book and sat on the living room sofa pretending to read. The dim lamp bled across the page, but I couldn't make out a single word. My head spun. I thought of Michael, my son who still believed he was happy with Allison not knowing the truth. How could I tell him his wife and his own father were betraying us? I thought of the bakery chain of 40 years of work and sleepless nights of every argument with Richard to protect my dream. He had never truly understood, but I had believed he supported me. Now I knew he'd only been waiting for his chance to take it all. An hour later, Richard shuffled into the kitchen for water. He spotted the keys on the counter and didn't suspect a thing. "Still up, Margaret?" he asked groggily. I smiled. "No, just reading a bit. Finish your water and go back to sleep." He nodded, drank, and headed to bed, snoring almost immediately. I watched him like he was a stranger. The man who once promised to stand by me to the end was now plotting to destroy what I loved most. But he didn't know I had begun to fight back. At first light, I got up. Sunlight tiptoed through the bakery windows. In the familiar kitchen, I kneaded dough-prepping bread and pastries for a big hotel order. I pressed into the dough with all my strength, channeling my anger into every movement. When I came home for breakfast, I kept my face calm. Richard was up cradling a mug of black coffee. I served him eggs and toast. "Richard," I said evenly, "tomorrow I have to go to Nashville to sign a contract with a new partner. I'll probably be home late. Can you handle dinner?" I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He looked up surprised, but what flashed in his eyes wasn't worry. It was relief. "Big contract?" he asked, squeezing my hand with a gentle act. "Don't worry. Go. I'll take care of it." But that quick spark in his eyes, the slight lift of his mouth like a burden had been lifted, stabbed me. He wanted me out of the house, and I knew exactly why. I nodded and smiled. "Thanks. If I'm late, I'll call." He took another sip of coffee, then stood, saying he had to get to the office early. As he left, he forgot his phone on the table, the screen lighting up with a missed call. The name started with A. My stomach clenched. Allison Thomas. I was sure of it. Before I could reach for it, Richard hurried back, snatched the phone, and locked the screen right in front of me. "Forgot this," he mumbled with a stiff smile. Then he left. I watched the door close, feeling like I'd just been slapped. He didn't even bother to hide it anymore. That day I worked like a machine, delivering pastries, signing invoices, smiling at customers. But my mind stayed on Richard and Allison. I couldn't let them keep performing their little play behind my back and Michael's. I needed more proof, needed to hear their own words when they believed no one was listening. That night I feigned fatigue. I went to bed early and told Richard I have to get up early for the bus station tomorrow, so I'm turning in. He nodded and patted my shoulder. "Get some rest, Margaret. Be careful tomorrow." I lay down and shut my eyes, but I kept my ears tuned to every sound in the house. Near midnight, when Richard's snoring stopped, I heard him slip out of bed. A faint glow from his phone cut through the dark. He left the room sure I was asleep. I stayed still, heart thudding, then eased up and crept after him. Hiding behind the heavy living room curtains, I saw him standing in a dark corner near the window. He lifted the phone to his ear and spoke softly. "Yeah, of course. Come to the house tomorrow. We won't need the hotel anymore. Margaret's leaving town to sign a contract and won't be back until late." A breathy giggle crackled through the speaker, Allison's syrupy voice. "Perfect, Dad. We can finally relax." Richard chuckled. "Yeah, get here early. I'll be waiting." Behind the curtain, my blood boiled. They weren't just betraying me. They planned to turn my home, my son's home, into their hideaway. I slipped back to the bedroom, opened a drawer, and took out Michael's old voice recorder, the one I'd bought him in college for lectures. I checked the battery, swapped in fresh ones, and set it to continuous record. I hid it behind the bookshelf in the bedroom near the headboard, confident it would catch everything. I tucked the wire neatly and concealed it with a family photo, the four of us at Michael and Allison's wedding. Looking at the picture, bitterness rose in my throat. Allison's smile, Richard's arm around my shoulder, now nothing but lies. Before getting back into bed, I checked once more that the recorder was running and set the frame carefully to hide the cord. Then I lay down and pretended to sleep. Richard returned, flopped onto the bed, and snored like nothing had happened. But my eyes stayed open in the dark, sharper than ever. I reached for the clock and set the alarm earlier than usual. I closed my eyes not to sleep, but to prepare. I was ready for the next step. I woke at 5 a.m., the sky still black. Only a sliver of streetlight slipped through the window. The house was quiet. In the kitchen, holding a cup of cold coffee, I stared at the skillet I'd set on the stove. It was the last step in my plan, a simple smoke trap, just enough to expose the truth. I tied a thin string to the igniter knob, ran it out the window, and fastened it to a weight, an old coffee can from the cupboard. With a pull from outside, the flame would catch the oil, sending up thick black smoke enough to alarm the neighbors. I cracked the window by the stove so the smoke would vent. I tested once. Smoke rose fast, curling like a warning. I shut the burner off immediately, checked everything again, and made sure I'd left nothing to arouse Richard's suspicion. I threw on a coat, grabbed a large bag, and pretended to head out for my trip. Before leaving, I went to the bedroom and gently shook Richard. "I have to get to the bus station now," I said calmly. "I'm going to sign the contract. I probably won't be back until late." He opened his eyes, voice thick with sleep. "Okay, be careful, Margaret. Call me if you need anything." Then he buried his face in the pillow. I looked at the man I once loved and trusted. Now he lay there, unaware of the trap waiting for him. I turned away, my heart heavy, but my steps steady. Instead of the bus station, I crossed the street to Mrs. Peterson's house. She's my neighbor and friend. She opened the door, saw my bag, and asked with concern, "Margaret, you're up so early. Is everything all right?" Her voice was full of kindness. I managed a smile. "Mrs. Peterson could. I sit here for a few hours. I need to keep an eye on my house." She frowned, but didn't press. She poured me a hot cup of coffee and pulled a chair to the window. From there, I had a clear view of my front door, the place Richard and Allison would walk through, the place the truth would finally show its face. Around 10 a.m., a taxi pulled up. Allison stepped out in a pale floral dress, big black sunglasses like she was afraid of being recognized. Richard opened the door, glanced around nervously, then hurried her inside. I gripped my mug, heart pounding. "It's time," I whispered, opening the app on my phone to connect to the recorder hidden in the bedroom. Sound piped into my headphones. Allison's laughter, the clink of glasses, heavy footsteps. Then Richard's low voice. "All right, we don't have to sneak off to the hotel anymore." Allison laughed. "You really do pick your moments. The old hag's gone right." I bit my lip, swallowing the fury as she spat out old hag with pure contempt. Then the bed began to creak, accompanied by sounds I had no desire to hear. I closed my eyes, drew in a deep breath, and told myself, "Just a little longer, Margaret. Just a little longer." Moments later, suddenly Allison screamed, "What the hell? We're stuck. We can't move." Her voice was frantic, nearly breaking into sobs. Richard growled, "Shut up! Hold on, let me see." I smiled. I tapped my phone, activating the smoke trap from afar. The string yanked, the gas burner clicked to life, the skillet of oil ignited. Thick black smoke poured out the kitchen window in choking spirals, billowing into the air like a distress signal. Mrs. Peterson gasped, staring out her own window. "Margaret, your house is on fire." I feigned fear, but inside I was strangely calm. Neighbors rushed out into their yards, shouting, "Margaret's house is burning. Call the fire department." Mr. Miller pulled out his phone, immediately dialing the city fire station. I sat still, clutching my coffee mug, eyes locked on my house. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. In my headphones, Allison's voice rose in desperation. "Richard, do something, I can't move," Richard snarled back. "Stop screaming, I'm trying." But I knew they could do nothing. The industrial-strength glue I'd swapped in had done its job, trapping them in their most humiliating moment. I pictured them thrashing, panicking, and a dark satisfaction stirred in me. Not because I was cruel, but because they had driven me here. They wanted to steal my bakeries, my family, my dignity. Now they would pay. The smoke thickened. Neighbors crowded together in panic. "What's going on?" someone shouted. "I heard Margaret left town for business," another replied. Mrs. Peterson stood beside me, her eyes sharp with suspicion, but she said nothing. She only squeezed my hand. I knew she had sensed the truth, but I didn't owe her an explanation. The truth was about to erupt, and I was ready. Within 10 minutes, the wail of fire truck sirens pierced the air like a death knell. The red engine screeched to a halt in front of my house. My son Michael jumped from the driver's seat in his fire chief's uniform, his face tense. He barked orders with authority. "Get the gear ready." There may still be people trapped inside. The sight was a dagger in my chest. My son, always so proud of his family, his parents, was about to face the ugliest truth. I wanted to run to him to cry, "I'm sorry, Michael," but I couldn't. I stood frozen, letting events take their course. Inside, the smoke curled thick in the kitchen, convincing Michael and his crew it was a serious blaze. He grabbed a sledgehammer, led the charge, and smashed the front door open. The wood splintered with a deafening crack. Firefighters stormed in with hoses and extinguishers. I heard the chaos from the bedroom feed in my headphones, Richard's desperate shouts mixed with Allison's sobbing. "Richard, do something, I can't move." Richard roared, "Shut up! Stop yelling!" I bit my lip, gripping the phone, still streaming audio from the hidden recorder. They were trapped, helpless, exactly as I had planned. Michael entered the bedroom, and I could only imagine what he saw: his own father and his wife, naked, glued together on the bed, pale with pain and fear. I wasn't there, but through the feed I heard Michael's voice crack. "What? What is this?" A firefighter behind him stammered, "Oh my God!" Another couldn't suppress a chuckle, but Michael snapped. "Quiet." I knew that shout wasn't just for discipline. It was his last attempt to shield himself from the pain. The humiliation was complete. Not just before Michael, but before the entire fire crew, and soon the neighborhood. A firefighter called out, "Chief, the smoke's under control. Just an oil flare-up, nothing serious." But Michael didn't answer. He was likely still frozen in that room staring at the scene. Neighbors crowded the yard, pointing, whispering, "What happened?" "It's Richard and his daughter-in-law." A woman shrieked, stunned. "My God, how could they?" Another echoed. Beside me, Mrs. Peterson pulled out her phone and quietly recorded zooming in on Richard and Allison writhing on the bed, faces twisted with shame and pain. She turned to me, eyes burning with both pity and fury. "Margaret, you knew about this, didn't you?" I said nothing, just gave a small nod, my eyes locked on the window. Michael's heavy footsteps echoed on the wooden floor as he left the bedroom. Through the recorder, I heard Richard rasp weakly, "Clear them out, Michael, shut the door." But it was far too late. The neighborhood was already gathered, their faces brimming with disgust, their whispers swelling into a chorus of shame. Father-in-law and daughter-in-law caught in the act. Unbelievable. Poor Margaret. How could it come to this? The firefighters, though hesitant, had no choice. They wrapped Richard and Allison in sheets, trying to cover their bodies as best they could, then lifted them onto stretchers. I heard Allison's broken sobs, mingling with groans of pain. "Please do something. I can't take it anymore." Richard muttered weakly, "Don't let them see us." But the whole street was watching. There were looks of disgust, mocking laughter, heads shaking in disappointment. They were carried out bundled in thin blankets, surrounded by the rising murmur of gossip. So shameful, father-in-law and daughter-in-law. Filthy. The ambulance sirens wailed as they were rushed away, but the crowd lingered outside my house. Over the noise, I heard Mr. Miller laugh loudly. Unbelievable. Two shameless people, that's what they are. An old woman shook her head, whispering to her neighbor, poor Margaret. I stood among the crowd, feigning shock as if I had just rushed back from the bus station. Michael stood frozen in the yard, his arms hanging limp, his face pale as a ghost. His crew avoided his eyes, quietly packing up their gear. I knew Michael wasn't only shattered by the sight of his father and wife glued together, but by the double betrayal of the two people he loved most. I longed to run to him, to hold him, to apologize for letting him see such horror. But I held back silently, following Mrs. Peterson, who guided me to the hospital. We sat in the third-floor hallway, me wearing the mask of a worried wife whose home had just caught fire. Hours later, a doctor appeared, sweat beading his forehead. He looked at me and said softly, "Mrs. Hayes, we managed to separate them. Luckily, no serious injuries. They'll just need some topical treatment." I nodded, pretending to be relieved, while my fingers discreetly brushed the handbag where I'd hidden 2 tubes of thick mustard. "Thank you, doctor," I said, forcing a tremor into my voice to mask my plan. "May I see them?" He nodded and led me to the nurse's station, where they handed me 2 tubes of ointment. The young nurse looked at me with sympathy. "Ma'am, this is a very difficult situation. I'm so sorry." I gave a weak smile, and the moment she turned away, I swapped the ointment for the mustard I'd brought. My hands moved fast and sure, like I'd practiced the motion 100 times in my head. I walked into the room with 1 tube of mustard in hand, feigning concern. "Richard, Allison. Are you two all right?" Allison lay on the bed, hair a mess, eyes red, unable to meet my gaze. Richard was still pale, stammering, "Margaret, I can explain." I didn't let him continue. I set the tube on the bedside table and stepped out. Minutes later, a gut-ripping scream tore through the room. Allison clutched her face, sobbing, "It burns. My skin is on fire." Richard writhed on the bed, cursing, "What the hell is this? Who did this?" The hallway erupted. Patients and families crowded the door. An elderly woman whispered to her son, "That's them, the pair from the video this morning. Father-in-law and daughter-in-law. How shameful." Another added, "Serves them right." The doctor rushed in, ordered the nurses to clean the area and apply a neutralizing agent. But the humiliation was already public and unstoppable. The video Mrs. Peterson filmed them being carried out on stretchers had spread through the neighborhood and across social media. I stood in the corridor listening to the murmurs, feeling as if the whole world were witnessing the downfall of those 2 traitors. When the crowd thinned, Michael came in carrying a thick file. I had called him as soon as the ambulance left, told him to fetch the envelope of evidence from my drawer and the 2 sets of divorce papers I'd prepared. He handed me the file, eyes hollow, saying nothing. I opened it, pulled out the documents, and laid them in front of Richard and Allison. I looked straight at Richard, my voice cold but firm. 40 years of marriage ends here. Sign. Then do whatever you want as long as you stay out of my son's life and mine. Allison collapsed, sobbing, turning to Michael. Please, forgive me. I was wrong. Please, I'm begging you. Forgive me. But Michael only stared, eyes like stone, then turned his back without a word. Richard tried to grab my hand, voice shaking. Margaret, listen to me. I didn't want this. I jerked my hand away, cutting him off. Don't say another word, Richard. You chose this. He cried out, desperate. Margaret, please. A nurse stepped in, reminding him, please keep it down. This is a hospital. I turned and walked out without looking back. In the hallway, I found Michael leaning against the wall, his head buried in his hands. I went to him, placed my hand on his shoulder, but he didn't look up. Mom, he whispered, voice breaking. Why Dad? Why her? I didn't answer. I just held him tight, sharing his pain with my own. In that moment, I knew Richard and Allison had lost everything, reputation, marriage, and their filthy scheme. But Michael and I had lost a family too. I could only hope that with time, we'd find peace again. A few weeks after the scandal, my bakery was busier than ever. The bell jingled nonstop. Customers came and went with smiles and kind words. Margaret, you're so strong, Mrs. Peterson said, holding a bag of fresh flan. The whole neighborhood is proud of how you defended your family business against all that filth. I smiled and thanked her. People supported me. They called me strong, but only I knew that strength was forged from the shards of my heart. Every time I looked at the ovens, the place I'd poured 40 years of sweat and tears, I thought of Richard and Allison, who tried to take it all and failed. I was still here with my bakery, with Michael, and with a new life. Michael moved in with me right after that day. He didn't say much about what happened, but I could see he'd changed. He wasn't the cheerful, easy-smiling Michael anymore. His eyes were deeper, carrying a wound that would take time to heal. Mom, I want to stay here for a while, he said, that first night, suitcase in hand. I'll help you manage the shop, talk to clients, whatever you need. I hugged him. I felt the warmth of the son I'd raised and simply nodded. I knew Michael needed time, and so did I. Every morning we opened the bakery together. I prepped the ovens and set the trays. Michael reviewed invoices, called hotels and restaurants. Mom, the Grand Hotel wants to increase next week's pastry order, he called from the register, voice steady but missing its usual spark. All right, I said. Confirm it for me. I'll prep more dough. Those small moments brought me a peace I hadn't felt in years. No more of Richard's deceitful looks, no more of Allison's sweet, calculating tone, just me and Michael caring for what we still had. Dinners were just the two of us now. We sat across from each other in the small kitchen, eating simple meals, sometimes chickpeas and chicken, sometimes just bread and coffee. Mom, can you make flan for me this weekend? He asked, lifting one corner of his mouth, the first smile I'd seen since it all happened. Deal, I said, relieved. But you have to help me stir the caramel. He nodded. In that moment, I felt us healing slowly but surely. I began carving out time for myself, something rare in 40 years. I joined a cooking club at the community center where women my age shared recipes and stories. Margaret, your flan is the best in the neighborhood. One woman laughed as I set down a tray. I laughed too. Just a little trick I picked up back in San Diego. On weekends, I went to church. I sat quietly in the colored light streaming through stained glass and prayed not for Richard or Allison, but for Michael and for myself, that we'd have the strength to keep going. Sometimes I strolled the town square with Mrs. Peterson, listening to her neighborhood updates. You know, Margaret, she said, eyes bright, people still talk about Richard and Allison, but they say the true winner is you. I only smiled. Maybe I won, I thought. But the price was a family. Michael slowly changed too. He grew less withdrawn and told me about his calls. We knocked down a fire at the market yesterday, he said one evening. It was dangerous, Mom, but no one got hurt. I listened, heart full of pride. Please be careful, I said, voice trembling. You're everything I have left. He looked at me gently. Don't worry, Mom. I'll never leave you alone. Those words were medicine, restoring my faith that despite everything we'd lost, I still had the son who would always stand by me. One afternoon, with the shop packed, I sat at the register and watched the flow of people outside. The bell kept ringing. The scent of pastries filled the air. I looked at the trays of flan and baked goods and thought about the journey. I had built this bakery with my own hands, from a girl in San Diego to a woman who learned to endure and to stand. Richard and Allison tried to take it all, but they failed. I kept the bakery. I kept Michael. And most of all, I kept myself. Do you like my story? And what city are you listening from? Share it in the comments. If you love her stories, you can support me with a super thanks so I can keep bringing you more heartfelt, meaningful her stories. Thank you so much for standing with her stories. I always look forward to reading your comments. Every note is the encouragement that helps her stories reach even farther. Right on your screen, you'll see 2 new her stories I truly recommend. There are many more waiting on the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and follow so you don't miss out. See you in the next her stories with all my love and gratitude.